The punch was clean, instinctive. It was the kind of hit you don't feel until 3 minutes later when the adrenaline fades and your knuckles start to throb. Chain guy went sideways. He didn't crumble gracefully like they do in the movies. He crashed backward into booth, his legs tangling in the table legs. Glasses shattered, ice sprayed across the vinyl, and a tray of shots went flying. Amanda screamed. It wasn't a scream of concern for me. It wasn't "Mark, stop," or "Oh my God, you okay?" It was a high, shrill sound of annoyance and embarrassment. It was the sound of a woman whose night had just been ruined, not whose husband was in a fistfight. It sounded distant, muffled by the roaring in my ears. For a split second, the club froze. The music seemed to stutter. Then the big one, the silent guy in the Henley, lunged. He moved faster than a man that size should be able to move. I barely had time to turn before his shoulder slammed into mine with the force of a battering ram. The air left my lungs in a violent whoosh. We hit the ground hard, a tangle of limbs and grunts. My head bounced off the floor. The world swam in a sudden, dizzying blur of purple lights and ceiling tiles. The smell of stale beer and floor cleaner filled my nose. But I wasn't done. I rolled quick, scrambling for leverage on the slick tiles. I got to my knees just as big guy tried to grab my jacket. I drove a punch square into his ribs. He grunted, a deep, guttural sound, and staggered back a step. "Get him!" someone yelled. I think it was Red Jacket. People were shouting now. The circle around us widened. I saw the glow of smartphone screens lighting up like fireflies in the dark, dozens of them, recording the spectacle. I was going to be content for someone's timeline tomorrow. Suburban Dad loses it. I got to my feet. Swaying slightly, my blood was singing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel numb. I didn't feel ignored. I felt alive, dangerous, and completely untethered. I turned to face Red Jacket, who was bouncing on the balls of his feet, looking for an opening. "Come on," I snarled, spitting blood onto the floor. I didn't care if they killed me. In that moment, I really didn't. But I never saw the fourth element coming. It wasn't a punch. It came from behind. A sharp, heavy crack against the back of my skull. Maybe an elbow, maybe a bottle. I never found out. The world didn't just fade. It tilted sideways. My legs turned to water. I went down hard. My cheeks smashed against the sticky floor, and the vibration of the bass drum rattled through my skull. My vision swam in sparks of white and gold. I tried to push myself up, my hands sliding in spilled liquor, but my motor functions had been cut. I felt boots near my head. A kick to the ribs that stole my breath again. Then darkness. Heavy, suffocating, and absolute. When I came to, the purple lights were gone. The thumping bass was replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears and the crackle of a radio. The world was sterile white. Clean. Sharp. I was staring up at a sky that was too bright. No, not a sky. Floodlights. "Sir, can you hear me?" A face swam into view. A paramedic. She had kind eyes, tired lines around her mouth, and a no-nonsense grip on my wrist. She held 2 fingers in front of my face. "Follow my fingers," she commanded gently. I tried. My eyes felt gritty, slow. My head felt like it was stuffed with cotton and broken glass. "Name," she asked. I tried to speak, but my jaw ached fiercely. I tasted copper. "Mark," I muttered. The words sounded slurred, foreign. She nodded like that was enough. "Okay, Mark, we're going to load you up. You took a pretty nasty hit to the head." I felt the lurch of the stretcher as they lifted me. The night air rushed over me, cold, wet, smelling of rain and exhaust. It felt incredibly good against my hot skin. As they wheeled me toward the ambulance, the crowd parted. Police lights bounced off the wet pavement, painting everything in frantic flashes of red and blue. I turned my head to the side, fighting the wave of nausea that rolled over me. And that's when I saw her. Amanda was standing just outside the club doors, under the black awning. She wasn't crying. She wasn't rushing toward the police to explain. She wasn't trying to push past the officers to get to the ambulance. She was standing with her arms folded tightly across her chest, her trench coat pulled closed. Her hair was frizzed from the humidity, and her mascara was slightly smudged, but her expression, it was the expression of someone watching a car accident they weren't involved in. She was soaked from the rain, shivering slightly, but she didn't move toward me. She didn't call out my name. She just stood there, watching the paramedics strap me down. Our eyes met one last time. In the movies, this is a part where the wife breaks down, where she realizes things have gone too far, runs to the stretcher, grabs a husband's hand, and whispers, "I'm so sorry." But life isn't a movie. In life, sometimes people just look at you and realize you're an inconvenience they're tired of dealing with. She looked at me with a mix of annoyance and relief, as if my being carted away solved the immediate problem of my presence. The paramedic blocked my view as she began to close the ambulance doors. "Wait," I croaked. "Relax, honey," the paramedic said, adjusting a blanket over my chest. "We got you." "No," I whispered, the realization hitting me harder than the bottle had. "She's not coming." The door slammed shut with final, heavy thud, sealing me in with the oxygen tanks and the smell of antiseptic. The engine rev and the siren wailed into life, a mournful, rising scream that drowned out the rain. I lay there as the ambulance rocked and swayed through the streets of Charlottesville. My jaw ached, my ribs throbbed in time with my heartbeat, and I could feel the sticky, drying blood on my temple. But strangely, beneath the physical pain, I felt a calm settling in. It was the calm of the wreckage. When a building collapses, there's a moment of terrible noise, dust, and chaos. But afterwards, there is just the pile, the rubble. It's still and it's silent. You don't have to wonder if the building is going to fall anymore. It's already down. Amanda thought she'd won that round. She probably thought I was lying there in the back of that ambulance broken, crying over her, wondering what I did wrong. But she was wrong. Something in me had broken loose. Not the kind of break that makes you bleed out. The kind that makes you see. The tether that had held me to her, that desperate need to please, to fix, to be the good husband, had been severed. I wasn't fighting for a marriage anymore. I was crawling out of its corpse. And this was the bottom. Being knocked unconscious in a bar while your wife watches from the sidewalk, that's the floor. Which meant the only direction left was up. Hospital ceilings don't look like anything until you've stared at one for 12 hours straight. They're a landscape of acoustic tiles, water stains, and fluorescent tubes that hum with a sound that burrows into your brain. They roll me into the ER, cut my shirt off, my favorite flannel, I noted with a distant pang of regret, and started the assembly line of trauma care. "Scale of 1 to 10, a doctor asked, shining a light into my pupils that felt like a laser beam. For, I lied, it was an 8. "He's got a high tolerance," the paramedic told him, took a bottle to the occipital, and was still trying to stand up. "You didn't visit me. Not once," I said, leaning forward. "Not a text. Not even a lie to pretend you cared. That's not forgettable. That's not forgivable. That's final." Her mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to respond, but nothing came out. She thought this would be her triumph, her moment of control. But all she had was silence, and me, finally calm, finally clear, finally free. I stood up, pushing my chair in carefully, and picked up the cane. She followed me down the hallway like a shadow that didn't want to be left behind. "Mark!" she called after me, her voice trembling now, suddenly softer, suddenly desperate. "Wait, please." She reached out with shaky hand to touch my arm. I stopped, but I didn't turn completely around. "I didn't mean for it to come out like that," she pleaded. "I was just stressed." I turned and looked at her, really looked. Her face was different now. Less sharp, more human, eyes glassy, lips parted like she was still hunting for the right line to say. For the first time, she wasn't smirking. "You were too overwhelmed to visit your husband in the hospital," I said flatly, keeping my voice level. "Too busy to send a text. Too numb to care. But now it hits you." Tears pooled in her eyes. "It's not that simple." "No," I said calmly. "It's exactly that simple. You walked away again and again. And when I didn't chase you fast enough, you decided to set the whole marriage on fire. I didn't light the match. Amanda, you did. You're not even trying to understand me," she whispered, her shoulders tensing. "I did, Amanda. I spent years trying," I replied. "You just stopped showing up." That landed. Her eyes welled, and this time, a tear actually fell, slipping quietly down her cheek. It looked real. I realized I didn't care if it was real or not. "I loved you," she whispered. Her voice choked. "You loved what I gave you," I replied, walking past her toward the stairs. "You loved being adored, supported, enabled. But when I needed you, even just to sit beside me while I healed, you chose strangers in a club." She nodded slowly, like she'd finally reached the edge of her performance and didn't know how to improvise anymore. Then came the inevitable pivot, the shift from emotion back to control. "The divorce doesn't have to be nasty," she said, brushing away her tears. We can split things fairly. Handle it like adults. Glad to hear it, I said, my hand on the banister. Let me know the court date. You're really done? I paused, 1 foot on the first stair. I looked down at the hand resting on the banister, the same hand that had just signed away my marriage. I was done, I said, my voice gaining strength with every word. The moment I realized you felt nothing while I bled. And I meant it. There was no anger left, no fire, just a clean break and profound quiet it brings. I headed upstairs, leaving her standing there alone in the hall, the same hallway where we used to hang framed pictures of vacations, the corridor between two strangers. I reached the bedroom, closed the door quietly, and sat on the edge of the bed. There was nothing victorious about this moment. It didn't feel like winning, but it felt like truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is infinitely better than living inside a lie someone else built for you. She could keep the kitchen table. I had the clarity, and that was the only niche I needed to survive now. She didn't stand up for me. She didn't say, "Hey, back off. That's my husband." She didn't offend the decade we built, the house, the life, the struggles. She just looked away, sipping her drink like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. The silence stretched between us, heavy and toxic. Even the people dancing nearby seemed to have stopped, sensing the volatility. The DJ, reading the room, actually dialed the volume down a notch, leaving us in a pocket of semi-quiet. "You're embarrassing yourself," Amanda said finally. Her voice was low, sharp, and laced with venom I had never heard before. "Go home, Mark." I didn't move. My feet felt nailed to the floor. "I'm giving you a chance," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I'm giving you a chance to say it to my face." She looked at me then, really looked at me, with an exhaustion that looked ancient. "Say what?" "That you're done." She hesitated. Her lips parted, and for a second, I saw the ghost of an apology form. But then she looked at Chain Guy, who was watching her with an expectant smirk, and the moment died. No words came, and that was the worst part. The silence was a confession. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She didn't ask me to stay. She just let me stand there, in the middle of flashing lights and strangers' eyes, a husband with no role left to play. I was an extra in a movie of her new life, and my scene had been cut. I took a step back. It felt like stepping off a cliff. One of the guys, red jacket, laughed softly, a short hess sound, like the scene had ended and they'd won a prize. I turned around. My chest felt hollowed out, scraped clean of anything resembling hope. I walked through the crowd, bumping shoulders again, but this time I didn't feel the impact. I stepped out of the velvet ropes and toward the exit. I stepped out into the rain again. This time, I didn't feel the cold. I felt clear, terrifyingly clear. Whatever was left between us, whatever scraps of affection or duty remained, Amanda had just set them on fire. And now I had to decide what to do with the ashes. I should have kept walking. I should have let the night swallow me. I should have gotten in my truck, driven home, packed a bag, and left the keys on the counter. I should have driven until the fog in my chest cleared or until I ran out of gas. But I didn't. I had my hand on the heavy metal door, pushing it open when I heard it. It wasn't even loud, just a quiet, dismissive chuckle. The kind you make when you've already decided someone is beneath you. It was Chain Guy. "Pathetic," he muttered. I stopped. The door hissed, shut in front of me. Something inside me snapped loose. It wasn't a decision. It wasn't a thought. It was a physical release, like a cable fraying and finally parting under too much tension. I turned around. He was still leaning back against the bar, legs stretched out like the establishment owed him something. Amanda had gone quiet, staring down into her glass now like she was reading tea leaves, like none of this concerned her anymore. She was pretending I was already gone. I walked back. I didn't rush. I walked with a scary kind of calm. "Say it again," I said. Chain Guy looked up. His smirk widened, but his eyes narrowed. "What?" "What you just said." I told him. "Say it again." He straightened up, puffing his chest out. "I said you look like a drowned rat, and that your girl is having more fun without you than she ever did at home." I nodded once. "Yeah, that." Then his friend, Red Jacket, with his twitchy, drug-fueled smile, muttered, "Should have stayed home, bro. Nobody wants to see you cry." And that's when I felt it. That hot, white surge of something primal. It wasn't anger anymore. It was survival. I didn't plan it. I didn't calculate the risk or weigh the consequences of fighting three men. I didn't think about my job or the police or my parents-in-law. I just moved. My fist met Chain Guy's jaw with a sickening, satisfying crack. She yanked the front door open. The wind howled into the hallway, scattering the mail on the side table. And just like that, she was gone. The door slammed with force that rattled the glass in the china cabinet. The vibration traveled up through the floorboards and into my shoes. No one moved. The house felt instantly larger, colder, and terrifyingly quiet. Walt cleared his throat, the sound loud in the stillness. "Mark, I'm sorry, son." Diane's voice was barely a whisper, thick with unshed tears. "She's not well. She can't be well." I stood there for a long moment, staring at the wooden door, half expecting it to open, half praying it wouldn't. Then autopilot took over. I walked them to their car in silence. The rain was coming down harder now, a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked through my shirt in seconds. Diane hugged me longer than usual, her grip tight, as if she were trying to hold me together physically. Walt didn't say much. He just gave me a look I couldn't quite name, something between profound regret and a strange, somber approval. He gripped my shoulder, gave it a squeeze, and got into the driver's seat. When I stepped back into the house, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I felt that eerie, heavy calm that comes right before a storm breaks. Amanda thought she'd won that round. She thought she had made her point, slammed the door, and left me in the dust. But I knew something she didn't. That wasn't a fight. That was the starting gun. I stood in the hallway, dripping rainwater onto the rug. I looked at the dining room table. The half-eaten soup, the empty chair, the candles burning down for no one. I didn't feel the cold. I just felt the burn in my chest and the sudden, horrible silence of a house that used to feel like mine, but now felt like a museum of failed life. I don't know what pushed me harder, Amanda's laughter as she had walked out, or the way Diane had looked at me, eyes wide, embarrassed for me, as if I were the one who had just thrown a grenade at the dinner table. I wasn't going to sit there stewing over cold soup while my wife played whatever dangerous game she thought this was. I grabbed my keys off the hallway hook. My hand was shaking just a little, but I clenched my fist until the metal bit into my palm. I walked straight out again, leaving the lights on, leaving the food on the table. Outside, the rain had thickened. It wasn't quite a storm, but it was steady, relentless. It felt like the sky was warning me, like it knew I wasn't ready for what I was about to see, and it was trying to wash me back inside. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I meant to, the leather creaking under pressure. The engine growled as I pulled out of the driveway, the tires spinning briefly on the wet asphalt before catching. My foot hit the gas a little too fast, but I didn't care. All I could picture was Amanda's face. How flippant she'd been. As if walking out on a family dinner was no bigger deal than skipping laundry day. The windshield wipers clicked back and forth. Swish, clack, like a metronome for my spiraling thoughts. What was I really going to do when I saw her? Ask nicely? Plead for the truth? No. That version of me stayed back at the house with the cold soup. I just wanted to see with my own eyes. Maybe part of me was still naive enough to hope she was just out with girlfriends, sitting in a booth, complaining about her boring husband. Maybe I needed to catch her in a lie before I could fully admit to myself that something inside us was already dead. The streets of downtown Charlottesville blurred past. Brick buildings glowed under the amber streetlights, the wet pavement acting like a mirror, doubling the world. College kids darted between crosswalks, their umbrellas bobbing like nervous blackbirds. But I wasn't seeing any of that. I was seeing Amanda's lipstick, that deep shade of red she only wore on nights when she wanted to be looked at by people who weren't me. I was hearing her heels clicking across our hardwood floor like punctuation to a sentence I hadn't agreed to write. I turned on to Jefferson, past the bookstore, then the corner coffee shop that used to be ours, the place we go every Sunday morning. And then there it was, the Black Lantern. Neon lights buzzed just above the awning, casting a sick, purple hue across the rain-slicked sidewalk. Even through the glass of my truck, with the rain hammering on the roof, I could hear the music. It was loud, throbbing young. I parked a block away, tucking the truck behind a dumpster to stay out of sight. I killed the engine. The ticking of the cooling metal filled the cab as I sat in silence for a few seconds. My hands were still gripping the wheel at 10 and 2. Amanda never used to lie. She used to lean into me at night and trace lazy circles on my arm until we both fell asleep. Now, she barely touched me at all. She felt like a stranger who just happened to share my bed. The rain picked up again, tapping on the roof like impatient fingers. Tap, tap, tap. I looked down at my wedding ring. It glinted in the passing headlights of a taxi. Then I looked out at the glowing club sign, pulsing like a warning beacon. I knew I couldn't go back to being blind. I couldn't go back to the house and pretend this didn't happen. I stepped out of the truck, slammed the door behind me, and started walking toward the truth. The inside of the black lantern hit me like a physical blow to the chest. It wasn't just a noise, it was the pressure. The air was hot, thick with the smell of expensive cologne, cheap beer, and sweat. The music was louder than I remembered any music being, a deep, synthetic bass that didn't just vibrate the floorboards but seemed to rattle my very teeth. It swallowed every thought I'd rehearsed on the walkover, shattering my planned speeches into useless fragments. Lights pulsed overhead in a disorienting rhythm of purple and strobe white, cutting to the haze of a fog machine. People were everywhere, swaying, shouting over the noise, clutching drinks in plastic cups. Above them, chandeliers that looked like upside-down fireworks spun slowly, casting fractured shadows that danced across the walls. I stood there for a moment, blinking against the assault on my senses. I felt like a ghost haunting a party I wasn't invited to. My coat was heavy with rain, water dripping from the hem onto the sticky concrete floor. I was a damp, middle-aged reality crashing a neon-soaked fantasy. I started to push through the crowd. I didn't say excuse me. I just moved, my shoulder-checking bodies that were too slow to part. I scanned the booths lining the walls first, expecting to see Amanda tucked away in a corner with the girls. Maybe sharing a bottle of white wine, maybe laughing a little too loud, but innocent. But the booths were full of college kids and couples making out. Then I checked the high tops near the dance floor. Nothing. And then I saw her. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't tucked away. Amanda was front and center, standing near the main bar, bathed in a wash of electric blue light. She wasn't with the girls from the book club. There was no Diane from accounting or Sarah from the gym. She was flanked by 3 men. Strangers. I stopped dead, people bumping into my back and swearing, but I didn't feel them. My world had narrowed down to that single tableau. These weren't the kind of guys who knew anything about mortgages, lawn care, or parent-in-law dinners. They were predators, sleek and groomed for the night. The one on her left had slick back hair, dark and oily under the lights, and a silver chain resting just above his collarbone against a black t-shirt. He was leaning in close to her ear, saying something that made her throw her head back. The second guy, standing slightly behind her, wore a red leather jacket that looked like a prop from a bad music video. He had a twitchy energy, scanning the room like he was waiting for a fight or drug deal. The third was bigger, a silent, hulking shape in a tight gray Henley. He didn't talk. He just leaned against the bar with proprietary air, creating a wall between Amanda and the rest of the room. Amanda laughed at something Chain Guy said. It wasn't a polite chuckle she gave my dad's jokes. It was a full-throated, uninhibited laugh. Her hand reached out and brushed his arm, a casual, lingering touch of familiarity that made my stomach twist into a knot so tight I thought I might throw up. She looked happy. That was the dagger. She didn't look guilty. She didn't look like a wife sneaking around. She looked free. She looked like the person I thought I had married was just a cocoon she had finally shed. I stood just past a velvet curtain that separated the bar area from the entrance. I was drenched, my hair plastered to my forehead, my boots heavy. I watched them for another 10 seconds, torture self-inflicted. Just to be sure, just to be absolutely certain there wasn't a misunderstanding. Then she turned. It was accidental. She was pivoting to order another drink, and her eyes swept across the room. They landed on me. Our eyes locked across 30 feet of crowded bar. I expected her to jump. I expected the glass to slip from her fingers, or for her face to drain of color. I expected the panic of a caught spouse. But she didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She didn't gasp. She just took a slow, deliberate sip of her drink, something pink and fizzy, and leaned back against the bar rail. She crossed one leg over the other, her posture shifting from open to guarded, but not fearful. It was as if this was just a regular Tuesday, and I was the weirdo for showing up unannounced. I walked toward her. My boots thudded against the sticky tile, a heavy, rhythmic march. People sensed the shift in energy. You know how it is in a crowd. Violence has a smell. A few heads turned. A bartender paused mid-pour, the bottle hovering over a shaker. I stopped 3 feet from her. "Mark," she said coolly. Her voice was flat, carrying just enough volume to be heard over the bass. "You look wet." The banality of the comment almost stunned me. I stared at her, water dripping from my nose. My voice stayed low, dangerously low. "You said girls' night." "I said I was in a club," she corrected instantly, her tone sharp. "You assumed the rest." Assumed? I repeated, incredulous. You walked out on your parents. On me. For this. I gestured vaguely at the three men surrounding her. Red Jacket chuckled from behind her, a dry, scratching sound. Is this your husband? Amanda smiled faintly, a tight expression that didn't reach her eyes. This is Mark. Chain guy, the one she'd been touching, slowly peeled himself off the bar. He gave me a once-over, his eyes traveling from my wet hair to my sensible jacket to my work boots. He looked at me like I was an unpaid bill, something annoying but ultimately dismissible. You came all this way just to check on your girl? He asked, his voice smooth, practiced. That's intense, man. Little possessive, don't you think? I ignored him. I kept my eyes drilled into Amanda's. Can we talk? Outside. Now. Amanda tilted her head, her earrings catching the strobe light. About what, Mark? About what? I stepped closer, invading her personal space. About how you left your parents mid-dinner. About the lies. About what this is. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. This is a Thursday night. You're making a courtroom scene. I'm making it a marriage. I snapped. Chain guy stepped in then. He didn't push me, but he moved into the space between us, acting as a shield. He leaned in closer to her, grinning like he was enjoying the show. Relax, man, he said to me, his breath smelling of vodka and mint. She's with friends. We're just vibing. Why don't you go home and dry off? I turned to him slowly. The rage in my chest was cooling into something harder, like molten steel setting into a blade. You don't even know her. He smirked. It was a knowing, arrogant look that told me he knew enough. I know she's done sitting at home watching Netflix with a guy who tracks her phone. That hit harder than it should have. It wasn't the insult itself. It was the fact that he knew that detail. Amanda had complained to him about me. She had dismantled our privacy and served it up to this stranger as conversational fodder. And worse, Amanda didn't correct him. They wheeled me off to imaging, CT scans, X-rays, the whirring of machines, the cold plastic of the table against my back. Through it all, I kept checking the door. I hate to admit it. Even after everything, after the dinner, the club, the look on her face outside, there was a tiny, stupid part of my brain that still expected her to walk in. I expected the door to burst open. I expected her to rush in breathless, hair wet, apologizing. I expected her to say she panicked, that she was scared, that she loved me. But the door only opened for nurses, for doctors, for a janitor emptying the trash. They moved me to a room around 3 a.m., ribs wrapped in gauze, and 4-line pumping cold saline and painkillers into my veins. A bandage stitched over the gash on my temple. Mild concussion, the doctor said, scrubbing his hands at the sink. You're lucky. Could have been a bleed. You've got 2 cracked ribs and some deep bruising. We want to keep you for observation until the swelling goes down. He turned to look at me, pen poised over his clipboard. Is there someone we should call? Someone to pick you up when you're discharged. The room went quiet. The heart monitor beeped, beep, 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 keeping time with the silence. I almost laughed. It would have hurt too much, so I just closed my eyes. No, I said, my voice rasping. There's no one. The doctor paused, gave me a sympathetic look that I hated, and nodded. Get some rest, Mark. By morning, the sun was cutting to the blinds in sharp, dusty slap patterns. A nurse brought in a plastic tray with scrambled eggs that looked like yellow rubber and lukewarm coffee. I poked at the egg with a plastic fork, replaying the night over and over. The visual of Amanda outside the club was burned into my retinas. It was on a loop. Her arms crossed, her face blank, the doors closing. She didn't come. Not once. I had been wheeled in on a stretcher, face swollen, blood on my shirt, and the woman who had stood at an altar and promise in sickness and in health didn't even ask which hospital they were taking me to. That told me everything I still needed to know. It wasn't just that she didn't love me anymore. It was that she didn't respect me enough to even pretend. I pushed the tray away. I wasn't hungry. I stared out the window at the parking lot below. Cars moving in and out. People living their lives. I reached for the phone on the bedside table. My own phone was dead, crushed somewhere in my pocket during the fight. I dialed the only number that made sense. Not her parents. I couldn't bear their pity right now. Not my work. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. It rang 4 times. Then, a groggy voice answered. Yeah. Cole, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Then a rustling of sheets. Mark? It's 7 a.m. on a Friday. Who died? I'm in the hospital. I said, St. Mary's. The tone changed instantly. The sleep vanished from his voice. What happened? I ran into some trouble. On my way, Cole said. Give me 20 minutes. He hung up before I could say thank you. I put the phone back in the cradle and leaned my head back against the pillow. The pain was throbbing behind my eyes, but for the first time in 12 hours, I didn't feel completely alone. And as I waited for Cole, I made a promise to the ceiling tiles. Amanda wanted a life without me. She wanted to treat me like a ghost. Fine. I was going to give her exactly what she wanted. I was going to disappear from her life, so completely she'd wonder if I ever existed. But before I did, I was going to make sure the exit was on my terms, not hers. The door handle turned. I braced myself, just in case. But it wasn't her. It never would be her again. And strangely, as the door swung open, I realized I was okay with that. My proper thank you to Eliza didn't happen right away. I didn't want the hospital to be the backdrop for my new life, and I certainly didn't want her to feel obligated by the context of our patient-nurse relationship. I waited a full week after the court ruling, giving myself time to breathe in the empty house and feel the closure settle. I finally called her on a Friday afternoon. My hands were shaking a little when I dialed a number I'd carefully memorized from her badge. Nurse Eliza speaking, she answered, her voice sounding crisp and professional. Instantly transported me back to the sterile white room. Hey, Eliza, I said, trying to sound casual. It's Mark, the concussion guy, the one who needed the fake apology crossword hint. A slight pause, then a quiet chuckle. Oh, Mark, I was wondering what became of the man who looked like he fought a tractor. You're out, I assume? Out, legally divorced and keeping the house, I told her, the words feeling huge and heavy, even over the phone. I owe you a decent cup of coffee. One that doesn't smell like hospital disinfectant. Can I buy you one? Just a genuine, out-of-uniform thank you. She hesitated for a moment. It's not my rule to socialize with former patients, Mark. I know, I said, but you were the only friendly face I saw that week. You were my only connection to sanity. And honestly, I wanted you to know that the truth I went looking for, I found it. It worked out. She was quiet again, and I could practically hear her debating the decision. Okay, she finally agreed. There's a little place near the park. It makes a decent oat milk latte. No scrubs, no charts, and no talk of fish in the break room. Just a thank you. We met the following Sunday morning. She was wearing faded jeans, a soft gray sweater, and had her hair down. No restrictive ponytail. She looked younger, lighter, and completely different from the efficient, battle-weary nurse I knew. When she saw me, her expression shifted from guarded to genuinely pleased. You look better, she noted, sliding into the booth across from me. That's the power of caffeine and anti-litigation, I said, managing a smile that felt real. Over the next hour, I told her everything. Not just the outline she knew, but the raw, messy details. The quiet horror of finding her at the club, the pain of the ambulance ride, the shock of the divorce ultimatum, and finally the cold, clinical triumph of the courtroom. I told her about Cole and the niche surveillance footage. She listened without interruption, nursing her latte. She didn't offer advice or pity. She just bore witness. When I finished, detailing the judge's ruling in Amanda's stunned silence, she looked at me and tapped the rim of her mug. You know what's interesting? She asked. In the hospital, you were physically broken, but you started healing immediately. Your mind was already clear. You weren't fighting for your wife. You were fighting for your self-respect. That's why you won, Mark. You valued the truth more than the marriage. Her observation was simple, but profound. She had named a new niche in my life. Integrity. You helped with that. I admitted your sarcasm was surprisingly grounding. It reminded me that the world was still normal, even when mine was burning down. She smiled softly. Everyone needs an anchor when the tide turns. You just happened to wash up on my shift. The conversation wasn't a date in the traditional sense. There was an ease, a shared history of trauma and recovery that made the atmosphere comfortable yet intense. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't need to. For the first time, I wasn't grasping for connection. I was just sitting in the presence of genuine, unburdened human warmth. It was intoxicating in its sheer normality. As we parted, she stood on the sidewalk, pulling her sweater tighter around her. Take it slow, Mark. The adrenaline of the fight is over. Now comes the quiet work. I know, I said. The house is next. It feels like a mausoleum right now. Make it a workshop, she advised. Fill it with your stuff, not her ghost. And if you need an opinion on paint colors, you know where to find me. The quiet work. That's exactly what it was. Coming back to the house after meeting with Eliza, I felt a renewed, almost surgical focus. The house was mine. Legally, emotionally, finally, but the air still felt thick with Amanda's memory. A suffocating blanket of pinks, whites, and expensive clutter that had never really felt like us. I started in the primary bedroom. I didn't explode in a fury. I moved methodically, like a demolition expert taking down a structure one piece at a time. I bought industrial garbage bags and labeled boxes. I packed Amanda's clothing first. The designer dresses, the shoes she never wore outside the city, the heavy, symbolic beige trench coat, the one she wore the night she walked out. Each item was placed carefully in a box labeled Amanda K. It wasn't angry. It was meditative. I didn't dwell on the memories attached to the items. I only registered the space they were now vacating. As I cleaned, the house physically changed. I found boxes of my own things shoved into the back of the linen closet. My old army duffel bag, my guitar that hadn't been played in years, a box of schematic drawings for a hobby project I'd abandoned right after we got married. Every time I pulled one of these forgotten relics out, it felt like retrieving a lost piece of my identity. Why did I stop building things? Because Amanda wanted us to go to antique shows on Saturdays, not spend them in the garage. Why did I stop reading those complex military history books? Because she said they were depressing, and asked me to talk to her instead. I realized that over the decade, I hadn't just compromised. I had actively suppressed my niche to fit into the life she wanted. The one where I was a stable provider, and she was the beautiful centerpiece. The quiet of the house, which had been deafening the night I came home from the hospital, now began to sound like opportunity. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was a silence of solitude. It was space waiting to be filled by my intentions. I stacked Amanda K. boxes neatly in the garage, ready for her lawyer to arrange pickup. Then I turned my attention to the walls. I stripped the pale pink paint, sanding it down to the drywall, preparing to cover the canvas with a neutral, masculine gray that felt like bedrock. I had the house. I had the clarity. I had the support of Cole and the unexpected warmth of Eliza. But the hardest part, the defining chapter of my new life, was just beginning. It wasn't about being Mark the ex-husband. It was about finding Mark the man. I needed to build a life so strong, so focused, that the past would never threaten to pull me back down. I needed to define my professional and personal niche, that focus area where my passion and my talent intersected, and build a future around it. And I knew exactly where to start looking. The final piece of closure came 2 months after the court date, on a cold, sunny Saturday morning. It was the day the lawyers had finally coordinated for Amanda to retrieve the last of her personal belongings. The boxes Cole and I had packed and stacked neatly in the garage. I was ready. I was standing in the kitchen, brewing a strong pot of coffee, when a sleek, black SUV pulled up the driveway. It wasn't the chain guy's vehicle, but a rental service paid for by her lawyer. She wasn't driving her own car. The house was silent, save for the low hum of the servers I had running in the newly fortified basement closet, the silent core of the niche security solutions. The walls were a solid, grounding gray. The windows were uncovered, letting the bright light flood into the simple, intentional space. The door opened, and she walked in, followed by 2 young movers. Amanda stopped just inside the threshold, her eyes sweeping over the hallway. She was dressed impeccably, but she looked thin, slightly frayed around the edges. Her mascara was perfect, but her face held a restless, hungry look that spoke of a life that hadn't quite delivered the freedom she'd envisioned. The instant her eyes registered the new color on the walls, the stripped-down masculine furniture, the absence of her decorative clutter, her breath hitched. The quiet was louder than any music. "Mark," she said, her voice softer than I remembered, hesitant. "What did you do?" I walked out of the kitchen, holding my mug, steady and unbothered. "I renovated." I said simply, "It's a different house now." The movers shuffled past her, heading to the garage door. Amanda ignored them, her focus entirely on me. She took a step closer, that familiar, manipulative warmth attempting to cross the space between us. "We need to talk," she murmured, lowering her voice. "About the settlement. That judge was completely unfair. You can't honestly want to walk away with nothing after everything we built." I didn't flinch. I just sipped my coffee. "The judge ruled on the evidence you created. I kept the house and the savings. That was the finding of the court. Amanda, it's final." She tried the pity plea next. Her eyes welled slightly. I know I messed up. I know I handled things terribly. But I was so hurt, Mark. You shut me out. I was lonely. She was reaching for the old narrative, the abandoned wife. But the room, the strong, clean scent of the fresh paint, the hum of the basement servers, it all contradicted her. There was no neglect here, only purpose. You were lonely, I conceded, my voice flat. So you found companionship by sleeping with a man who had just assaulted your husband. You made your choices, Amanda. I made mine. Her tears dried instantly. She went for the attack, trying to destabilize me one last time. And look at you. You kept the house, but you're still alone. You're running some pathetic little security operation out of the garage. You think that's a life? I smiled. It was genuine. It was a smile of a man who knew his value. Let me show you my pathetic operation, I said, walking toward the garage door. I pushed the heavy door open, revealing the brightly lit, meticulously organized space. Cole was inside, supervising the last of the packing, looking like a capable, silent guardian of my success. The walls were lined with customized components. Soldering irons were neatly racked, and a high-resolution display showed live, encrypted thermal feed from a client's property 50 miles away. Amanda gasped. She walked into the garage, taking in the technical complexity, the focused precision. This wasn't a hobby. This was a serious, high-end workshop. This is the Niche Security Solutions, I said, my voice firm. We design bespoke surveillance and security setups. We cater to a specific market that needs surgical, focused solutions. We deliver the truth with maximum discretion. I pointed to the servers. I took the one good idea that came out of your failure, the need for specialized evidence, and I built a company around it. You thought I was tracking you? I'm sorry to say, Amanda, I wasn't even focused on you. You were just a proof of concept. The blow landed perfectly. She realized the full scope of her defeat. She had provided the very idea and opportunity for my success. Her infidelity hadn't ruined me. It had defined and launched me. You did this despite me, she accused, her voice trembling with genuine rage now. No, I corrected, stepping closer. I did this to find me. You wanted a man who would fit into the life you designed. You wanted a provider who wouldn't question you. I wanted purpose. I found it in building things, in solving problems, in integrity. You taught me the value of focus. Amanda, you taught me the value of the niche. The movers pushed the final boxes past us, slamming the rear of the SUV shut. I have to go, she whispered, backing away, realizing she had nothing left to say, nothing left to take. Go, I told her, my voice devoid of emotion. You don't get to disrupt this anymore. Your scene is over. She turned and rushed out of the garage, fleeing the silence and the truth of the new life I had built on the ashes of the old one. Cole gave me a sharp nod, the silent affirmation of a job done. The SUV pulled out of the driveway, the sound of the tires crunching on the gravel fading to nothing. I closed the garage door, sealing the workspace, sealing the past. That night, Eliza came over. She had asked me a simple question earlier in the week. What does it feel like now? Is it really over? I had told her I couldn't answer until after the final visit. We were sitting on the new porch swing, the quiet of the night broken only by the chirping of crickets. The windows glowed with soft light. The house felt warm. So, she prompted, her voice soft. I took her hand. It felt warm, solid, and real in mine. It's over, I said. Completely. She tried to apologize, to manipulate, to negotiate. I felt nothing but detachment. She's a memory. She's research material. I looked at her, at the woman who had guided me back to myself without demanding anything in return. She was my anchor, but she wasn't my replacement. She was the reward for the hard work of healing. I don't need a wife, Eliza, I told her, finally giving voice to the core truth of my rebirth. I need purpose. I need to work, to build, to stay focused on my niche. I spent 10 years trying to be someone else's everything. Now I just need to be Mark. She squeezed my hand. I don't need a patient, Mark. I need to be a nurse, a friend, and maybe, eventually, a partner to someone who knows exactly who he is. I leaned in and kissed her. It was the first kiss, a gentle, slow connection that tasted like fresh air and shared understanding. It was a kiss that promised no grand rescue, only the possibility of a steady, shared journey. The divorce was not a story of a husband who lost his wife. It was a story of a man who lost his way and found it again, not in the chaos of a broken marriage, but in the precision of his own focus. I had found my niche professionally in the quiet, focus, integrity of my work, and personally, in the steady, honest foundation of my own making. The niche was simply the life that was left when all the clutter, all the lies, and all the distractions were finally stripped away. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever built. The house became my workshop, not immediately, but in the weeks following the court date. I didn't tackle the whole structure at once. I started with the garage. It had always been Amanda's buffer zone, a place for her old fitness equipment and holiday decorations, a space I was rarely allowed to clutter. Now, I emptied it completely, ripping out the rotting shelves and scrubbing the oil-stained concrete floor until the air no longer smelled of mildew and dust, but solder and freshly cut wire. This was the start of building my niche. My hands, which had been numbly signing mortgages and pushing papers for years, rediscovered the language of tools. I set up a heavy workbench, installed new focused lighting, and unpacked the crates that held my real passion, the abandoned projects of Mark before Amanda. There were microsensors, old surveillance components from my Army days, thermal imaging kits I bought and never assembled, and schematic drawings for secure wireless networks. I was an explosive guy. My talent wasn't in brute force. It was in precision, in focus, in finding the unseen thread that held the whole structure together. It was about defining the exact problem and delivering the singular solution. And the divorce had provided the perfect proof of concept. Cole hadn't needed a sprawling, expensive security system. He had needed a single, specialized camera placed in a specific, focused niche, the rose bush, to deliver the single piece of evidence that changed everything. That was the market, the specific, specialized security solution that nobody else was offering. Not general alarm systems, not floodlights, but discrete, custom-built solutions for high-stakes, private situations. Bespoke truth. I called Cole. He came over the next day, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, and walked straight into the garage. He didn't ask about the lack of pink walls inside the house. He didn't need to. He saw the stripped walls, the tools, the blueprint I'd taped to the wall, and understood. "This is good," he said, running his hand over the smooth wood of the new workbench. "This is you." I pitched him the idea, standing amidst the organized chaos of resistors and wire spools. "I can design the systems," I explained, gesturing to the schematics. Bespoke surveillance, hidden cameras in the garden rock, microphones in the light fixture, remote access, encrypted feeds, stuff for when a client needs specific, undeniable truth, not just a siren going off. "Like what you needed," Cole finished for me. "Exactly," I affirmed. "The truth niche. But I can't do the rest. I can't do the sales pitch, the networking, the legal liability. And I certainly can't do the physical installs in 3 different states alone." Cole grinned, leaning back against the wall, his arms crossed. "And that's where I come in. Ex-military background, high-trust networking, logistics, and I know exactly what it takes to get in and out of a target site without being detected. We call it the Niche Security Solutions." It was perfect. It was a name that contained the entire philosophy of the business. It was focused, precise, and professional. Cole and I shook hands right there over the clutter of a newly built prototype sensor package. The partnership was instant, seamless, and based entirely on mutual trust and complementary skill sets. Cole was the face and the muscle. I was the brain and the precision. We spent the next month working nonstop, fueled by bad coffee and the sheer joy of creation. The house quickly followed the garage's lead. I painted the living areas a warm, quiet gray. I sold off Amanda's fussy furniture and replaced it with solid, comfortable pieces. A worn leather couch, a massive oak dining table that Cole and I built in the garage, and simple, functional shelving for my technical books and tools. The house didn't just feel empty anymore. It felt spacious, masculine, and deliberate. It was no longer a mausoleum. It was a fortress, a hub, a place where my work got done. The first few jobs were small, discreet, and intensely rewarding. A small business owner who suspected a bookkeeper fraud. A mother needing to monitor her elderly parents in home care. We solved their problems with the surgical precision of specialized tech, confirming suspicions, providing the undeniable truth, and proving the viability of our niche. The technical challenge was everything I had suppressed for a decade. It engaged my mind completely, leaving no room for regret or rumination over the past. I was building a future, literally and professionally. Meanwhile, the connection with Eliza was a slow, steady burn. We continued to meet outside of the hospital, a weekly check-in, always low-key. She watched the transformation of my life from the outside, impressed but cautious. I didn't pressure her. I understood that I needed to be a whole person before I could ask her to be a part of my life. One evening, she came over after a double shift, the first time she'd seen the house since the renovations. She walked to the gray-painted living room, her eyes taking the simplified furniture, the focused lighting, the tools in the garage visible through the back door. "It looks finished," she said, running a hand over the solid surface of the new kitchen counter. "It looks like Mark lives here now." "It's a workshop," I agreed, "and a place to sleep. It's exactly what I need." "And the company?" "We're calling it the Niche Security Solutions," I told her, pride coloring my voice. "It's about finding the singular point of failure, the exact, precise problem, and solving it with the perfect tool. No wasted effort, no unnecessary noise." She smiled, a genuine, tired, beautiful smile. "I like that. No unnecessary noise. That's a good place to start over." We sat on the porch swing Cole had helped me build, the evening air cool and crisp. We weren't talking about my past anymore. We were talking about her job, her goals, the absurdity of human behavior. The weight was gone. I realized now, I told her, looking out at the dark silhouette of the rose bush where Cole's camera had sat, that my old marriage wasn't even a battle. It was just clutter. I was suffocated by things that didn't matter, fighting for a life that wasn't mine. Now, everything matters. Every wire, every installation, every client we help find the truth. That's my niche. She reached out and put her hand lightly on my arm. It wasn't a demanding touch. It was an affirming one. "You're building something real, Mark. Something honest." I knew then that my recovery wasn't measured by the silence of phone or the absence of Amanda. It was measured by the hum of the soldering iron in the garage and the slow, steady rhythm of this woman's companionship. The fight was over. The creation had begun. And it felt like everything. There was only one piece of the puzzle left. The final confrontation that would truly seal the door on the past forever. We didn't go out to celebrate. There were no raised glasses, no grand speeches, no high fives exchanged in the hallway of the courthouse. Mr. Sterling shook my hand, his expression still professional but tinged with satisfaction. "Clean win, Mark. She's got nothing left to leverage. It's over." I nodded, feeling a strange lightness in my chest, like a physical weight had finally been lifted. I watched Amanda and her lawyer huddle together, their faces pale and defeated. The image of her looking stunned, her carefully constructed narrative lying in shards on the courtroom floor, was the only closure I needed. I didn't pity her. I just felt the immense, quiet relief that comes when persistent headache finally breaks. Cole was waiting outside on the steps, leaning against a pillar, enjoying a cigarette. He dropped it, crushed it under his boot, and fell into step beside me. "Where to?" he asked. "Route 29. I replied. "The diner, the one with the chipped mugs." He grinned. "The place where the waitress calls everyone Han?" "That's the one." We took the booth by the window, the same one we used to sit in back in the day, after drills, after funerals, after long talks that required more than a phone call. Some places don't change. And in a life that had just been utterly dismantled and rebuilt in a courtroom, that permanence was a deep comfort. Cole slid a chipped mug of black coffee across the table to me, without saying a word. For a while, we just sat there. The low hum of the overhead fan spun above us. The rhythmic clink of silverware echoed from nearby tables. An old Patsy Cline song was playing faintly from a jukebox. It was a sound of ordinary life, slow and reliable. Then Cole leaned back, taking a deep, satisfied sip of his own coffee. "Damn good timing on those photos, Kenner. You owe me a new rose bush, though." I chuckled softly, still feeling the weight of the courtroom's silence settling in my bones. "You're a sneaky bastard, you know that? I barely saw you move the camera." He shrugged, completely unfazed. "They made it too easy. Everyone was drunk. Nobody looked twice at the shadow on the porch. Your girl, sorry, your ex-girl, was too busy playing hostess and celebrated her new freedom to notice me on the porch." I shook my head. "I didn't think you'd actually catch anything that explicit. I thought maybe just a kiss. A hug." "I knew I would," he countered, meeting my gaze. "I just didn't know how bad it would be. 3 nights after you got cracked? That wasn't impulsive cheating, Mark. That was disrespect codified." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We watched the traffic crawl by outside the window. Autumn had started to show its hand. Yellow leaves skimming across the pavement, like little reminders that things change whether you're ready or not. Then he asked the question I knew was coming, the one that needed asking. "You okay?" I looked out at the yellow leaves. "Yeah," I said eventually, letting the word settle. "I think I am. I'm not happy, but I'm okay. You sure? I looked at him. No, I admitted honestly. But for the first time in years, I'm not pretending. He nodded, like that was enough. And coming from Cole, a man who saw through every facade, it was everything. We talked a bit more about the sheer theater of the court scene. The judge's poker face, Amanda's shocked silence. We talked about how strange it felt to win something that never should have been a battle in the first place. You know, Cole said, tapping his mug, you handled that better than I would have. How so? He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. If someone dragged me through that kind of mud, if they betrayed me and then tried to steal the house while I was concussed, I wouldn't have stopped at the courtroom. I would have used that footage and a whole lot more to ensure she was financially ruined. I'd have exposed her to the world. A lot of guys would have gone for total destruction. I thought about Chain Guy, about the smugness, about the way Amanda had offered me up as a sacrificial lamb. The anger was still there, a pilot light deep in my gut, but it wasn't guiding me anymore. Maybe the old me would have. I conceded. The mark from 10 years ago, full of righteous fire. But you know what? Watching that footage, seeing her face in court when the truth played, that was enough. I didn't need the money. I needed the confirmation. I needed the truth to be public, legally sanctioned. Closure, not revenge, Cole murmured, summing up my internal state perfectly. Exactly. I wanted to prove that she was lying, not just the judge, but to myself. And I did. She's empty-handed and I have the house, but more importantly, I have my time back. I have the space to figure out who I am without carrying the weight of her demands. I realized then what the niche was in this new life. It wasn't just Cole's targeted surveillance. My niche now was truth. I was leaving the chaos behind, moving into a space where honesty, however painful, was a foundation. Amanda chose the facade. I was choosing the bedrock. We finished our coffee, and the mood shifted from reflective to pragmatic. The old soldier in Cole took over. So, the house is yours. Now what? You staying? I looked at him, feeling the weight of the key in my pocket. The key to a now empty, quiet house. Yeah, I have to. It's the one thing she wanted to keep the most, and it's the only physical thing left of my former life. I'm going to clean it out, maybe sell off some of the furniture, and keep it. I need to make it mine again. I need to make it Mark's house, not our mausoleum. Good. You need a project, Cole said, standing up and reaching for the check. I need more than a project, Cole, I said, putting my hand over his on the bill. I need a purpose. I was a husband. I was a homeowner. I was everything she needed me to be, but none of it was me. I need to figure out who Mark is now. He paused, then nodded, understanding the depth of that loss of identity. We'll figure it out. First things first, we're going to clean out that rose bush you destroyed from my surveillance niche. I laughed, a real, honest-to-God laugh that didn't hurt my ribs. Deal. But there's one more thing, I said, standing up. I haven't told Eliza I'm out of the hospital yet. I think I owe her a proper thank you. She was the one who reminded me I was still a person. Cole raised an eyebrow, a slight, knowing smile playing on his lips. The nurse with the kind eyes? Go get him, Mark, but take it slow. You just signed papers, not a new contract. I knew he was right. I was free, but freedom didn't mean leaping into a new relationship. It meant learning how to walk again, slowly, deliberately, and with my eyes wide open. My new journey wasn't about finding someone else. It was about finding myself. And that was going to be the hardest fight yet. I laughed, actually laughed. It hurt my ribs, but I didn't care. It was the first time my chest expanded without rage or grief inside it. From then on, our conversations became a kind of quiet ritual. She'd come in each morning with a coffee, black for me, oat milk latte for her, and pretend she hadn't brought an extra cup on purpose. I'd pretend I hadn't been watching the clock, waiting for the sound of her approaching squeaky sneakers. You're a decent liar, she told me one morning, sitting at the edge of the bed, but not a great one. Comes from being married too long, I replied. She sat, sipping slowly, her gaze steady. Want to talk about it? I hesitated, but there was no judgment in her voice, no therapist tone, no pressure. So I told her, not all of it, just enough. The dinner, the storm out, the club, the fight, the silence, the shame of being a spectacle. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer sympathy or outrage. She just listened, like someone who understood exactly what it meant to be discarded too easily. After I finished, She tapped her cup gently against mine. To survival, I tilted mine toward her. And stubbornness. The days blurred, but not in a bad way. My body healed quicker than I expected. The bruises faded. But it was a stillness that helped the most. Waking up without Amanda's phantom presence in every room. Without the exhausting weight of her demands. For the first time in years, I wasn't treading water in someone else's tide. I was still, and stillness is where you figure out who you are again. One afternoon, Eliza brought a crossword puzzle and sat on the windowsill. "Help me out," she said. 6 letters, starts with R, means fake apology. I glanced at the page. Regret. She grinned. "Look at you. Quick brain under all that swelling. What do I win?" She thought about it. Another day not getting dumped. I laughed again. Too late. She paused, and her smile softened just a fraction. Yeah, but maybe not forever. There was no flirtation in her voice. Just warmth. The kind that made you want to believe good people still existed. I don't know when the shift happened, but somewhere between the quiet mornings, the sarcastic jokes, and the way she refilled my water without being asked, I started to feel human again. Not healed, not whole, but possible. And that was more than I expected. I realized. If Amanda thought I'd just lie here in this hospital bed and fade into background, she hadn't seen the man I used to be. That man was waking up again. And someone or several someones was about to regret it. The focus wasn't on mending the past. It was on clearing the path to the future. Coming home was nothing like I imagined it would be. I walked out of the hospital around noon, carrying a small plastic bag containing my ruined flannel shirt and the rest of my toiletries. Cole was waiting downstairs in his truck. He didn't ask questions about my final talk with Eliza or how I was feeling. He just nodded, drove me home, and pulled away with a quiet, "Text me later." I stood on the curb for a minute. The house looked the same. Our blue shutters still needed painting. I had planned to do it this spring. The porch light flickered faintly, even in the daylight, like it always had. But stepping through that front door, everything felt different. The air was colder, emptier. The faint smell of rosemary and lemon from the abandoned dinner was long gone, replaced by a lingering, sterile stillness. I set my keys on the counter and leaned the cane, a temporary aid for my bruised ribs, against the wall. And then I saw her. Amanda was already at the kitchen table, which had been cleared of the disaster from 3 nights prior. She was sitting with her legs crossed, wearing a charcoal dress, and her hair pulled back in that severe, neat bun that always made her feel more powerful than she was. In front of her, resting neatly between 2 unlit candles, was a stack of legal-sized papers. And her smile, thin, satisfied, and utterly without warmth. It cut through the room like a scalpel. "Took you long enough," she said without looking up from her phone. She was texting someone, her thumb moving rapidly across the screen. I didn't respond. I walked slowly to the counter, taking a moment to breathe. I was still sore, bandaged ribs, a bruise along my jaw that hadn't completely faded. But none of that compared to what was about to come out of her mouth. Mentally, I was a fortress, fortified by silence and clarity. She finally looked up, her eyes sharp, and pushed the papers forward with 2 perfectly manicured fingers. "These are for you." I stared at them for a half-second too long. Divorce papers. Clean, cold, clinical. The end of a decade, reduced to black and white clauses and signature lines. "We both know this isn't working, Mark," she said, her voice businesslike. "And I'm not interested in dragging it out. I've already spoken to someone." I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, slowly and deliberately, my movements careful because of the pain. "Really?" I asked quietly, my voice flat. "You didn't have time to visit me in the hospital, but you had time to find a lawyer?" She blinked, just once. That was her tell. She hadn't expected me to call it out that fast, that cold. Her voice wavered just slightly. "I was overwhelmed, Mark. You picked a fight in public. You humiliated me." I laughed, a short, bitter sound that felt more like a cough. "You left me bleeding on a club floor. Amanda, you ghosted me in the emergency room." "I didn't ask you to come," she snapped. "No," I said. "You haven't asked me anything for a long time. You've just demanded." She drew in a slow, exasperated breath, regaining her composure. "Look, we're adults. We don't have to make this ugly." She folded her hands on the table, leaning forward conspiratorially, as if this was still a negotiation. "Fine. Then let's be direct." She smiled, the expression unnerving in its sweetness. Either you sign the papers and we dissolve everything cleanly, or you accept the new terms of this marriage. I looked at her, stunned despite my resolve. New terms. She nodded, proud of her perceived generosity. You accept my male friend. You don't ask questions. We stay married. You keep the house, keep the stability. I keep my life. It's not that unusual. A lot of couples evolve. Evolve, she said. My mind went quiet. The shock was so profound it canceled out the rage. She wasn't asking for an open marriage out of desire for freedom. She was asking for permission to betray me without the guilt, without losing the roof over her head. She wanted the suburban security, with the club life promiscuity. You're giving me options? I asked, testing the limits of her audacity. Compromises, she corrected sweetly. You want permission, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, to betray me without the guilt. She rolled her eyes, instantly dismissing my feelings. Oh, please, don't act like you're some wounded saint, Mark. This is modern life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break the glass-like calm I had built around myself. I simply reached forward, picked up the pen from beside the papers, and unscrewed the cap. I signed the documents right then and there. My signature, Mark Kenner, was steady and firm. I signed the first page, flipped it, signed the second, and kept going until the stack was complete. The scratching sound of the pen on the paper was the only thing I could hear. She blinked, hard, her composure fractured, the neat bun suddenly seeming less powerful. Were you? I recapped the pen and pushed the stack across the table with my finger. You wanted clarity? I asked. You got it. I'm done. She sat back like I'd slapped her, a flicker of genuine shock in her eyes. She hadn't expected compliance. She had expected a fight, a plea, a negotiation where she could dictate the terms. Hospital ceilings really don't look like anything until you've stared at one for 12 hours. They are blank canvases painted with boredom and sterile anxiety. That night, I lay there motionless, my ribs wrapped tight in gauze, the drip pumping cold fluids into my veins. My head throbbed, but the pain was distant, like background music you've learned to tune out. The real injury wasn't physical. It was sitting somewhere deeper, just under the skin, pulsing with every broken memory. Amanda didn't come. Not once. I'd been wheeled in on a stretcher, face swollen, blood on my shirt. The woman who once promised me in sickness and in health didn't even send a text, let alone ask which hospital they'd taken me to. That lack of curiosity, that cold, absolute indifference, told me everything I still needed to know. They cleaned me up, stitched the gash on my temple, and ran the scans. By morning, a nurse brought in a plastic tray with scrambled eggs that looked more like punishment than food. I poked at them, replaying the club scene, the laughter, the sound of the bottle hitting my skull, and most vividly, the look on Amanda's face, detachment, as if I were someone else's problem. I must have dozed off, because the next time I opened my eyes, the room smelled different. It smelled like rich, black takeout coffee and faint, familiar aftershave. And there he was, Cole Benton. Same crooked grin that never quite reached his eyes, same faded denim jacket he'd worn since the early 2010s. He'd aged a little, sure, lines etched deeper around his mouth and eyes, but some people carry time like a badge of honor. Cole wore his years like a tattoo, bold, slightly faded, and unapologetic. Jesus, man, he muttered, pulling a stiff plastic chair beside the bed with a screech. You look like a bobcat attacked a bulldozer. I tried to grin. It hurt. It was only 3 guys. 3, he whistled, shaking his head. Overachiever. Cole and I served together in Kandahar. We were in the same unit, sharing the same dirt, the same ration packs, the same terror and boredom. He knew me before the mortgage, before the wedding, before I started trying to build this respectable, quiet suburban life with Amanda. He knew the Mark who was capable of doing things that weren't necessarily pretty, but were always necessary. He reached into a paper takeout bag and handed me a thick sandwich wrapped in foil. Bacon and egg, he announced. From that grease pit place on Main Street, not hospital rubber. You're welcome. I nodded gratefully and took a bite. It was greasy, salty, and utterly real. It tasted like the past, like a lifetime ago when our problems were simpler, even if simpler meant ducking mortar fire. We talked for a while about nothing and everything, the Army small-town politics, old squad gossip. It was easy, seamless. Cole didn't demand the story. He waited for me to offer it. Eventually, he leaned back, one leg crossed over the other, and looked at me the way only someone who knew your worst day could. She really didn't come. It wasn't a question. I shook my head, my jaw tight. Didn't call. Didn't send a text. Nope. He whistled low, tipping his coffee cup. Man, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I already knew the ending. I think she's gonna throw a party. I said finally, the idea just forming in my mind, cold and sharp. She always said the house felt too quiet when I was home. She gets restless when I'm not around. She needs noise. People. And by people, you mean her crew? Cole nodded slowly, processing the implication. She thinks you're down for the count. I looked at him. Something in me, that old, hard military training, was steadying. Would you swing by the house? Park up the street, maybe after dark. Just keep an eye. See who shows up. Cole didn't hesitate. His expression was instantly focused, moving from friend to operative. Hell yeah. Give me the address and the details. I'll go tonight. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It wasn't about revenge yet. Not exactly. It was about drawing a line. Finally, clearly, it was about not being the only one holding the broken pieces anymore. He stood, pulled his jacket on. Text me the address again, just in case. He paused at the door, his hand on the metal handle. He looked back at me, his eyes serious. You still want her? The question hung there, heavy and quiet. I didn't answer right away, because honestly, I didn't know. The memory of the woman I married was fighting with the reality of the woman who watched me bleed. I want something more than her. I said finally. Closure. Truth. Maybe even justice. Cole nodded. Justice it is. Hospitals are strange places. You arrive broken, and somewhere between the fluorescent lights and the endless hallways, people expect you to begin healing. Not just physically, but emotionally, as if surgical repair naturally leads to emotional clarity. It doesn't. But sometimes a stranger helps you breathe again. Her name was Eliza, Nurse Eliza, according to the chart at the foot of my bed. She wore scrubs that looked like they'd seen 100 bad days and a ponytail that refused to stay put. There was always one loose strand tucked behind her ear, and she had this walk, brisk, no nonsense, like she didn't suffer fools, but secretly liked them anyway. The first time we really spoke, she was replacing my 4-bag. She glanced at my scowling face and muttered, You keep scowling like that, and your forehead's going to need its own prescription. I blinked, genuinely surprised. Sorry. She smiled faintly, not looking up. You've had the same storm cloud expression for 3 days. Just figured I'd warn you before your face freezes like that permanently. This isn't a funeral, Mark. It caught me off guard. Not the sass. God knows I live with plenty of that. But the ease of it. Like I wasn't a case file or a blood pressure number. Like I was a person again. I've had a rough week. I admitted, my voice a little rough. Yeah, she said, taping the line in place. Try working 3 double shifts next to a guy who microwaves fish in the break room. That's trauma. I don't care how long I live, or how many memories fade into the gray static of old age. I will never, ever forget the sound of Amanda's chair scraping back across the hardwood floor. It was a sharp, stuttering screech that cut through the warm hum of the dining room like a knife. We were in the middle of dinner. Not just any dinner, but the kind of meal you spend 2 days preparing. I had roasted a chicken with rosemary and lemon, the way her father liked it, and the corn chowder was still steaming in the tureen. Her parents, Diane and Walt, had barely finished complimenting the soup. Diane had actually closed her eyes to savor the first spoonful. When Amanda stood up, she didn't excuse herself. She didn't offer a polite smile or check her watch with a look of feigned concern. She just grabbed her phone off the table, the screen lighting up her face with a harsh blue glow, and said almost cheerfully, I'm heading out. The girls are already at the club. The room didn't just go quiet. It stalled. It was as if she had sucked all the oxygen out of space. I looked up from my plate, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, a piece of roasted potato trembling slightly on the tines. Wait, what? I asked, the words feeling clumsy in my mouth. Amanda didn't even flinch. She didn't look at me, and she certainly didn't look at her parents. She was already moving toward the coat rack in the hallway, her heels clicking a fast, impatient rhythm on the floorboards. She was reaching for that beige trench coat, the expensive one she only wore when she wanted to make an entrance, the one she only wore when she wanted attention from people who worked me. I told you earlier, she threw over her shoulder, her voice light and airy, as if we were discussing the weather and not her abandoning a family dinner. I set my fork down with a clatter that sounded too loud in the silence. No, Amanda, you didn't. She let out a tired sigh. The the kind of exaggerated exhalation you save for toddlers who refuse to put on their shoes. She paused with one arm halfway into the sleeve of her coat and turned to look at me. Her eyes were empty of warmth, devoid of connection we used to share. "Mark, we've been over this," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I need time with my friends. It's not a crime to want a social life." I rose slowly from my chair. My legs felt heavy, but my chest was starting to burn with a heat I recognized. It was humiliation. "You invited your parents here for dinner," I said, my voice steady but low. I gestured to the table, to the candles flickering, the wine breathing in the decanter, the food that was rapidly going cold. "You cooked." "Well, you asked me to cook, you set the table, and now you're bolting before the entree is even out of the oven?" Diane blinked rapidly, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. She looked between her daughter and me, a look of confusion and hurt dawning on her face. Walt shifted in his chair, his heavy brows knitting together in a frown. "Amanda," Diane whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm not doing this in front of them," Amanda said sharply, cutting her mother off. She pulled the belt of her trench coat tight, cinching it like armor. "Oh, we are doing this," I snapped, stepping away from the table and moving into the hallway to bridge the distance between us. "Because you've been slipping out more and more lately, Amanda. First, it was the book club that runs until midnight. Then girls' night 3 times a week. Late meetings on Fridays. And every single time I ask you about it, you act like I'm the problem. Like expecting my wife to be present is some sort of tyranny. You are the problem," she shot back, her voice rising now, losing that cool detachment. "You monitor everything. You track my time. You think just because you pay the mortgage and handle the bills that you own me. You think you bought a wife." The accusation hit me like a physical slap. I felt the blood rush to my face. "Don't you dare twist this," I said through gritted teeth, stepping close until I could smell her perfume, a scent that used to mean date night, but now just smelled like absence. "This isn't about money. It never has been. This is about respect. And tonight you just disrespected everyone at this table. You invited them into our home, and you're walking out on them." Amanda turned to her parents, crossing her arms defensively. She had this way of tilting her head that used to look playful, but now just looked cruel. "Do you see this? Do you see how controlling he gets when I try to breathe?" Diane looked stricken, her face pale in the candlelight. She set her glass down with a shaking hand. "Honey, this isn't like you. Leaving in the middle of dinner? Mark worked so hard on the food." "You've changed," Walt added quietly. His voice was deep, usually jovial, but now it sounded rough, like gravel grinding together. He didn't look at his food. He looked straight at his daughter. "You never used to be cruel, Mandy." Amanda scoffed, her eyes flashing with sudden, sharp anger. "So now you're siding with him? Your own daughter stands here telling you she feels suffocated, and you side with a husband?" "I'm siding with the truth," Walt said. He stood up then. Walt was a big man, a retired foreman, and when he stood, he commanded the room. He leveled her with a rare, steady glare that I hadn't seen in years. "And what I saw tonight, the way you spoke to him, the way you dismissed your mother, that wasn't you. Or at least, I hope to God it isn't." I don't know what cracked louder in that moment, Amanda's facade or the silence that followed. She stared at her father, her mouth opening and closing slightly, her script failing her for the first time. She looked back at me, her face contorting not into shame, but into fury. "You think you're so noble," she hissed, her voice shaking. "You act like you're this perfect suburban martyr, keeping the home fires burning. But you're just a sad little man, Mark. You're desperate to be needed because you have nothing else. And you," I said quietly, my voice barely carrying over the sound of rain starting to tap against the window pane, "are trying so hard to be someone else that you forgot who you used to be." For a moment, just a split second, something in her expression faltered. I saw a flicker of the woman I had married, the vulnerability, the softness. But then she took a sharp breath, her eyes hardened into flint, and she turned her back on me. "I'm done explaining myself to you. The time between signing the papers and the initial court date was a stretch of quiet, cold calculation. My body was healing. The bruises faded into mottled yellows and greens, but my focus was entirely on the legal fight. It wasn't about the money, it was about the truth. My attorney, a sharp, silver-haired man named Mr. Sterling, specialized in cases where the narrative was contested. He listened to my story without judgment, focusing only on verifiable facts. She's going for abandonment, neglect, and emotional distance, he told me during our first meeting. It's a powerful narrative, especially if she plays a wronged, lonely wife. We need to disprove the premise entirely. A week after I was discharged, Cole showed up at the house. He didn't come in, just stood on the porch with a travel mug and a discreet black box. "Here," he said, handing me the box. 2 nights of footage. Nothing fancy. Just a motion-activated camera tucked into the rose bush outside the living room window, focusing on a very specific niche. The front room activity after 11 p.m. Your girl didn't disappoint. He looked tired, but resolute. She brought the whole crew, Mark. Chain guy, red jacket, the whole circus. 3 nights after you got stitched up. It wasn't a party, Mark. It was a victory celebration. The weight of that information was heavy, but necessary. It solidified the clean break. It was the absolute, unarguable confirmation that I had been abandoned and betrayed not just emotionally, but physically, while I was physically injured. The courtroom smelled like old paper, stale coffee, and polished cherry wood. It was a space designed for solemnity, where emotions were supposed to be reduced to evidence and legal language. I sat there in my navy blazer, clean-shaven, my demeanor calm. Across the aisle, Amanda was seated next to her attorney. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and a pale gray skirt, the perfect image of grace under pressure, the supportive wife now blindsided and discarded. Her hair was down, soft around her shoulders, designed to look approachable and vulnerable. She played her part well, even nodding politely to the judge when addressed. But as I watched her shift in her seat, smoothing the wrinkles in her skirt and rearranging her expression every few minutes, I realized something fundamental. She didn't come here to divide assets. She came here to perform. She came to win a reputation war. Amanda stood when called. Her testimony was a masterclass in controlled sorrow. Her eyes were just moist enough, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Your Honor," she said, her hands folded neatly on the railing of the stand. "I tried. I truly did. But you can't pour from an empty cup, and Mark had become emotionally unavailable, absent, even when he was physically home. Our marriage deteriorated beyond recovery because I felt neglected, lonely, and frankly, abandoned." She went into detail about her supposed months of isolation, about my alleged coldness, and how the fight at the club was simply the culmination of my controlling behavior and her desperate need to breathe. Her attorney painted her as a supportive wife, now forced into a new life. Then came the ask: half the house equity, substantial alimony for reestablishing her life, and a claim on our joint savings. She expected to walk away richer, cleaner, and with the moral high ground. I kept my face perfectly still. She didn't know what was coming. When it was our turn, Mr. Sterling stood up, slow and methodical. He had a look in his eyes that I knew meant blood in the water. "We respect the petitioner's emotional narrative, Your Honor," Mr. Sterling began. "However, we believe that the definition of abandonment must be applied carefully. We intend to show that the petitioner was not abandoned, but was actively and aggressively pursuing an extramarital life, a pursuit she continued even when the respondent was hospitalized and recovering from injuries directly sustained because of her behavior." He then called Cole to the stand. Cole walked up slowly, respectful but radiating an internal calm. He was in a press shirt, buttoned all the way up, and he spoke plainly, looking the judge directly in the eye. "My name is Cole Benton. I've known Mark for over a decade. We served together overseas. I visited him in the hospital a few weeks ago. And were you present at Mr. Kenner's residence during his recovery?" Mr. Sterling asked. "Yes, sir," at his request. "Why?" Mark suspected Amanda might host guests at the house while he was still admitted. He wanted verification of his suspicions. Amanda's attorney stood up instantly, his face flushed. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation and character assassination." Mr. Sterling waved him off with a crisp hand movement. "We're not talking theory, Your Honor. We have proof." He handed the bailiff a small flash drive. The judge, a pragmatic woman in her 60s with stern, tired expression, plugged the drive into the court computer. A few clicks later, the flat screen mounted on the far wall flickered to life. Amanda froze. She was no longer performing. She was paralyzed. The footage wasn't grainy. It wasn't doctored. It was sharp, clear, and date-stamped. There was Amanda, 3 nights after I had been assaulted and hospitalized. She was in our living room, the space where we used to watch Sunday movies, laughing, dancing, and then kissing a man, the slick-haired chain guy from club. They stumbled toward the couch, drinks in hand. At one point, Amanda climbed into his lap, her laughter loud and clear on the courtroom speakers. She was celebrating. She was celebrating my absence. The room went silent. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Instead, I watched the judge's face. She didn't look shocked or disgusted. She looked utterly unimpressed by Amanda's poor judgment. Amanda, across the aisle, sat frozen. Her hands were gripping the edge of the table, so tightly her knuckles were white. Her careful facade had shattered into a million pieces. The judge paused the footage on a still image, Amanda looking up at the man, a triumphant, reckless grin on her face. "Do you dispute the authenticity of this video, Mrs. Kenner?" the judge asked, her voice even. Amanda didn't speak. Her lawyer whispered something fierce to her, his hand pressed against her back, urging her to deny it. She shook her head, ever so slightly. "No," she finally whispered, her voice brittle, totally defeated. Mr. Sterling stood, folding his hands. "Your Honor, my client respectfully submits that the claim of abandonment is not only patently false, but that the petitioner, Mrs. Kenner, was actively and egregiously unfaithful during a time when my client was hospitalized and recovering from injuries sustained during an incident tied directly to her behavior. She was fully engaged in a new life, and her presence was removed by her own choice." The judge removed her glasses slowly, looking from the screen to Amanda, and then to me. "Mrs. Kenner," the judge said, her voice firm, "you are requesting assets based on a narrative that this evidence flatly contradicts. This court finds that you were not abandoned, but rather that you abandoned your role as a spouse and your marital obligations. In light of this, and your clear misrepresentation of the circumstances surrounding the dissolution of this marriage, your request for alimony and the division of the primary residence is denied." The gavel fell like thunder. Thwack. Amanda didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't scream or argue. She just sat there, lips parted, stunned into absolute silence. She'd expected to walk out of here victorious, arms full, eyes dry, painting herself as a survivor. Instead, she sat empty-handed while the truth, my truth, played on a screen for everyone to see. As I stood to leave, she looked at me one last time. It wasn't with anger, and certainly not with love. It was with something unfamiliar. Fear, regret, the recognition of a life she'd carelessly thrown away. I didn't know what the emotion was, and I didn't care, because that courtroom wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. And now, finally, I had it.